You called it healing, but really it was survival, dressed in rituals and language and light. You weren't becoming free, you were getting good at bleeding beautifully. You were told to heal, so you did. You journaled, you forgave, you excavated. You named your trauma, spoke your truth, built new rituals from the rubble. You lit candles over wounds, turned your pain into poems, made your survival look sacred. And for a while, it was, and that worked. But somewhere in the devotion to wounds, something twisted. Healing stopped being a process and started becoming a personality. You became the one who was doing the work, the one who could name their patterns, the one who held space, saw clearly, cried publicly, processed relentlessly. But behind the language of transformation, you were still bleeding. Only now you'd made your pain holy. This is the wounded healer, the archetype who transforms through suffering, but when distorted, begins to confuse wounding with wisdom. You didn't mean to stay in this. You just learned that your pain made you valuable, that your story made people lean in, that your scars gave you something to say. And before long, you didn't know who you were without it, without the ache, without the next breakthrough, without the newest wound to process in community. The healing became the high, and the suffering became the script. You kept going deeper, not to find peace, but to keep the story alive. Because pain, when it's all you've known, starts to feel like home. And here's the true cruelty. People praised you for it, called you brave, called you grounded, inspiring. They were praising your suffering, not your sovereignty. Because what the wounded healer rarely admits is this: the pain gives you a purpose. It gave you a role, a voice, access to spaces and conversations that wholeness might not. And so you kept the wound open, not dramatically, but subtly. You kept rehearsing the old story, kept identifying as in processing, kept relating through hurt. Not because you didn't want to heal, but because you didn't know who you'd be without the healing to do. This is the martyr's bargain. If I stay broken, I stay needed. If I keep bleeding, I stay loved. But love built on wounding isn't love, it's pity. And pity is a poor substitute for presence. So what now? You stop. Not the growth, not the inner work, but you stop worshipping the wound. You stop defining yourself by what hurt you. You stop mistaking trauma for truth. You stop using the language of healing to hide the fact that you're afraid to truly be whole. Because wholeness is quiet. Wholeness doesn't need a platform. It doesn't need a story. Wholeness doesn't gather applause because it no longer performs. And when you step into that version of yourself, the healed self, you might lose some of what the pain gave you, the attention, the relatability, the currency. But what you gain is far greater: simplicity, presence, clarity, joy that doesn't need a redemptive arc. You become someone who no longer needs to talk about the fire because you're too busy living on the other side of it. You become someone who remembers that pain is only the beginning of the journey, not the destination. And when you speak now, it's not from the wound, it's from the well. Not because you deny the hurt, but because you no longer need it to define your worth. Healing is not who you are. It's how you return to who you've always been without the performance that requires an audience. Welcome to The Architect Speaks.